Valerie, whenever you're ready I'm going to mute and I'll just
Okay,
keep admitting people if they come in or if for some reason you drop back out. But I'm
okay.
here. Have a good session.
Sounds great. Thank you. All right. So, hello and welcome to our panel. It's called Literary Mutations and Generative Partnerships. And thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Valerie Witte, and I'm joined today by three other writers, Sangamithra Iyer, Shein, and Jhani Randhawa, to explore what working in collaboration with other writers and artists can bring to one's artistic practice. We'll start by sharing some of the collaborative projects each of us has been engaged in recently, with an emphasis on how to break out of solitary practice through cross-genre and cross-disciplinary collaborative projects. We'll discuss how to amplify bold ideas through the inclusion of multiple perspectives, and we'll explore ways to reimagine authorship as an evolving collective process. We'll then have a discussion about our experiences working in collaboration, followed by an audience Q&A. At the end of our talk, we'd like to invite you to join us in an interactive writing activity called a cento, which is a poetic form that's essentially a pastiche poem made up of lines from the work of an author or other authors. We'll explain more about this later, but if there are any lines from our readings and our presentations that jump out for you as we go, you might want to just like jot them down so you have them at the ready for the end of our session together. And now Sangamithra is going to start off with her presentation. And should I just keep sharing my slides, Sagu?
Sure. And then at the next slide, so good afternoon. I'm Sangamithra Iyer, and I'm going to talk about literary partnerships and cross-disciplinary approaches that I took in my debut book, Governing Bodies, a Memoir, A Confluence, a Watershed. If we could go to the next slide. So I consider this book a watershed in that it is a basin that holds and receives and connects all the various streams in the book, which include family history, the rights of animals, and the memory of water. Um, I'm going to walk through some of the concepts that I introduce in the book that are related to literary partnerships, which include confluence, Mitra, Shizengaku, Katina, collaboratory, and cross-pollination. And so we'll start with the next slide with confluence. I call this book a confluence as it sits on the confluence of both art and science and prose and poetry and both personal and planetary grief. And I open the book with these lines. What you must understand is that when I tell you a story about my body, I cannot separate it from a story about water. And a story about water is also a story about family. And a story about family is rooted in the earth. And when I tell you about the earth, I must tell you about elephants and chimpanzees, cows and chickens, coral and trees, monkeys and bees. What harms one body harms all bodies. Like tributaries to the same river, our stories are entwined. And I had the pleasure of collaborating with my niece, Lavanya Monicum, to realize sort of my dream table of contents to be shaped like the Triveni Sangam, this confluence of three rivers. And the book is structured as three rivers in three parts. The first is written to my paternal grandfather, who I never met. The second to my late father, whose death in 2003 really prompted many of the quests in this book. And the third to you, my reader, as a way of kind of navigating these concepts from the past and how we use that to navigate the world that we're living in right now. So I wanted to talk about another term called Kalyana Mitra, which is on the next slide. And so part of my research was trying to trace my grandfather's engineering career in Burma before he quit to join the freedom movement in India. And I had traveled there in 2013 and met this really extraordinary water activist called Nini. And that's a picture of her with her notebook sketching water bodies. And I have a scene in the book, where she is drawing in her notebook saying, "If I can sketch Myanmar, it looks like a kite," she said as she drew in her notebook. Kipling, she asked me, Kipling in the old days wrote about the road to Mandalay. That is not a road, but a waterway. The road to Mandalay is the Irrawaddy. And then she drew a line down the middle of the kite, which lined up with so many of my grandfather's postings down the Irrawaddy. And I was able to trace, and those little dots are like his postings in this map, his footsteps from the source in Mitzone all the way down to where the Tavoy River empties into the Andaman Sea. And I was thinking a lot also about water as a proxy for history, as a witness to history, and also a companion on my journey. And so Nini, my water activist friend, had introduced me to this term. It's called Kalyanamitra, which means spiritual friend or coworker, and how when two people meditate and sit side by side, it's more powerful than each of us doing it alone, and how we feel strength and support just knowing that there's other people doing this work with us. And I feel like so much of my book has been sitting with so many different kinds of Kalyanamitra, and Nini is one of them. Some of the folks in this call today are also others. And I also was thinking about water as a companion, in this book, and animals too. And so if we can go to the next slide. I write a lot about animals in the book from my experiences researching working elephants in Burma to volunteering at chimpanzee sanctuaries to documenting the rise of factory farming in India. And I'm thinking a lot about animal agency and how to foreground their experiences and inquire about their perspectives. And I have this thing called the Literary Animal Project, where I'm trying to curate conversations around how we portray animal lives on the page. And, what's very important to me is giving them personhood, changing the style guide to allow for personal pronouns and not its. And in the book, I also introduce a word called shizengaku that I encountered from this Japanese primatologist, Kenji Imanishi. And he says it doesn't fit into any particular academic discipline, and that when we're talking about nature, we have to talk about it as not matter, as living, as this colossal maternal body, a giant, a behemoth within which we and all the myriad of creatures have always been nourished. So I think that's also something I've been thinking about, of just like how to portray this sort of interconnectedness on the page. And then if we go to the next slide, I also consider this book to be a katina, which is a chain of linked texts. And I'm just going to read a section from the book where I talk about this. At the New York Public Library, I unbox a fragile volume of Howard Williams's The Ethics of Diet, published in the late 19th century. It is a subtitle that catches my eye. A katina of authorities deprecatory of the practice of flesh eating. A katina, a chain of linked texts. Williams compiles an anthology of thinkers who critiqued the consumption of animals, linking Prince Siddhartha to King Ashoka, to Pythagoras to Plato. Williams goes on to assemble over 40 of their descendants in vegetarian thought. In soil science, a katina is a sequence of distinct soil layers that co-evolve down a slope. Each are unique but connected. In my journeys to recover ancestral knowledge, I realized there were other lineages I should be exploring too, lineages of ideas and of influences. So I think in thinking of literary partnerships, I thought about the book as sort of expanding this katina, and also as a way to acknowledge like similar thinkers who came before me. And I wanted to close in this last slide for now, on the next page, as like an example of a partnership that combines all of these terms in terms of confluence, Kalyanamitra, katina, and incorporating these multi-species considerations. And my friend in Kalyanamitra, Lisa Hermer, who I think is on the call, had invited me to create a welcome sign at the Toronto waterfront, which was actually at a physical confluence, of a river at the mouth of the Don River. And it was part of her poetic infrastructures for these reassembled lands project, to create these welcome signs to these new lands that were being engineered and created to restore ecological habitat. And as an engineer, I sort of welcome the opportunity to think about poetic infrastructure, not just through an engineering or technical lens, but through like a philosophical lens of thinking about infrastructure as the framework for a society. And I had told Lisa that this project also reminded me of King Ashoka's rock edicts in India. And I'm named after Sangamithra, King Ashoka's daughter. And King Ashoka had sprinkled across his vast empire these rock edicts that proclaimed compassion and religious tolerance, and an end to animal sacrifice. But he also had like prescriptions around public works and making sure you account for plantings and water and to make sure you're feeding animals along the way. And so I kind of felt like this was my extension of this katina emanating from King Ashoka, and a way to convey a sense of mutual flourishing when we welcome other beings we share the planet with. So my edict was swim, fly, nest, gather, love, breathe, all species welcome. And with that, I'll close for the discussion for now and introduce our next panelist, Shein. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. That was so interesting. Can everyone see this?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. My presentation is called Collaborations and Community. And I would like to share this artwork by Suzanne Jackson at SF MoMA. Over the years, I've collaborated with visual artists, filmmakers, dancers, musicians, and other writers. And today I'd like to present a few collaborative projects with artists. And I'd like to begin with some ways poets, writers, and artists can work together. So here are some ways that we can work together. Co-create a series of broadsides or create a book with visuals and text. Work on small or large-scale collaborations. I once worked on a project in Clarion Alley, which had a number of murals, and it was a collaboration with 12 artists and 12 poets. Conduct site visits separately and together and share documentation. That can always be really interesting when poets and artists work on projects like that. Writer gives a text to a visual artist who responds with an artwork, and then you continue the process over time. I'm involved with 3 collaborations in this way. And one thing that's kind of fun is each collaborator responds to the other's work without seeing the context until a later date. And finally, collaborating on poetry films and videos. So here are a few ideas of collaborations. So I want to start with a quote, and it's by Chrissy Orr, artist and activist. What if collaboration and all its messy complexity was how we interacted dated? So I wanted to say a little bit about my most recent book, Percussing the Thinking Jar, published by Omnidon. This poetry collection has 16 Sumi ink drawings by my longtime collaborator, artist Mark Dutcher, and he also did the cover art. And the process took place over a period of 3 years during pandemic times. And I would write a poem and send him maybe 2 or 3 poems. And then he would write back with his drawings, send me a picture, and then would just continue this process going back and forth. So he created maybe a total of maybe 30 to 40 drawings. And over time, we just kind of narrowed it down together. And it was just a wonderful process working together with Mark. Here are two of his Sumi ink drawings, and they're throughout the book. And one of the things in this book, over time, I realized that I was writing in these certain patterns, and I decided to create inventive form around these patterns. So they're called thought logs. I have a number of them in the book, and I thought I would share one of them. Thought log: forest guardians, oxhair rogues, pewter magpies. What's working right now? It's possible to be okay and not okay at the same time. I lost my sizzle reel in the void. Emerald swans, cricket satchel, yodel odes. Identify the risk you're taking. My log hears things I cannot hear. My anxiety about disappointing my therapist, sclera, retina, macula. We tend to not move in digital space. I feel like a ghost haunting my own life. Vata and the vine, Pitta of the mind, Kapha and its kind. Freed by our predictions. I adore my boundaries. Check the air quality index. This will be the last time I use this sink. So one of the extensions of the thought logs, when I was originally drafting the first ones, I recorded them with my friend, collaborator, Evan Karp, who's a writer and a musician, and we created an album from those early thought logs. And as far as broadsides, I and my friend Adrian, who I'll talk about a little later, we made a set of broadsides with Mark's drawings and poems from the book. And then also I started reaching out to other artists and responded with artworks. And this is one of them by Cheryl Barton Petrie. And this is a jelly print that she made. This is a rather new collaboration. It just came out this week, so it's kind of exciting, by Linda Sacaccio, Rigor and Sky, A Communion. It's a limited edition, hand-bound, letterpressed anthology. And this book is a phrastic collaboration by 6 poets who responded to a series of 25 paintings by Linda. And this series of paintings originated in a small book, handmade in Nepal. And yeah, just off the press, hot off the press. And I wanted to share 2 of the poems from the book. This painting is number 37, and this painting is number 102. 37. I dab viridian green on eyelids. A gnat hums. In the factory, an opera is born. Number 102. Magenta sky space. I bathe in mint. A bobcat in the bush. And this is an artist, Elizabeth Scher, who I've collaborated with a number of times, and I just decided to choose one of our book projects. Elizabeth was sheltering in place and started doing text-based pieces. And I would visit her studio in Berkeley and just have many conversations. And I wrote a series of short poems, which ended up together in an exhibit, or a few exhibits, and published as a catalog. So I'll read one of them. We say, let's focus on a moment. Together, a present. We see one madrigal on a rooftop outside. A telephone pole with 3 strips of yellow. And finally, I'd just like to wrap up with Literary Cherry, which I might talk about a little bit later. It's an online collaborative project with Adrian, and we have been writing in real time and posting them once a week. And thank you so much, everyone. And I'm going to stop there. And I would like to introduce Valerie Witte. Thank you.
Hello again. Wow, thanks, Ma. I'm just blown away by the variety of all the different collaborative and multidisciplinary work that you do. It's very so creative and fun. And Sangha, your work is so rich and so complex and fascinating. So I'm just happy to be here with you all. So I am going to share, this is more of a kind of going to be a little more of like a reading presentation, focusing on an excerpt from my collection, essay collection that I co-wrote with another writer named Sarah Rosenthal. And the book is called One Thing Follows Another, Experiments in Dance, Art, and Life Through the Lens of Simone Forti and Yvonne Rainer. And they're somewhat well-known dancer choreographers, but their work had been, we felt, kind of a little bit maybe overshadowed by some of their male counterparts in the postmodern dance world. So we wanted to kind of amplify their work. So in these essays, we respond to themes that they addressed and explored in their work, but we also are interweaving memories of our own personal experiences with dance. So it's kind of a hybrid poetic essay slash memoir kind of project. So Sarah and I have worked on this project. It's a 2-book project for kind of like the better part of a decade. So we've been in, there have been periods where we've been in like almost constant communication with each other. So I think just from the collaboration standpoint, a lot of just correspondence. We have like multiple massive Google Docs, just like writing back and forth to each other. So we've been in this mode of generating ideas and giving and receiving feedback in a way that's been very fruitful and rewarding for both of us. So today, as I said, I'm going to share part of an essay that I think is particularly collaborative in the sense that it brings in voices of both Forti and Rainer, and as well as quotes from various art and dance critics. So in a sense, I feel like all of these other figures and voices come into the essay, and they also become collaborators in the piece. So I think of collaboration in like a broader way too. So in the reading today, I'm going to play a recording of this piece, and it's going to kind of hopefully enact this assemblage of all these disparate voices. And I'm going to try to illustrate it like orally and also visually. No, not quite. A little bit of background about what this piece is drawing from. It includes language adapted from one of Simone Forti's news animations. This one in particular was from 2016. And her news, so she did a series of these over since the 80s till the around 2016 was one of her later ones. Her news animations were inspired by her father's avid reading of newspapers, which prompted him to flee Mussolini's Italy in 1938 with his wife and 3-year-old Simone. The pieces involve improvisational performances in which she'll often bring like a pile of newspapers on stage, and then she just kind of responds both through spoken word and bodily movement to like the headlines that she could read in the moment. So it's very improvisational. She said herself, moving and speaking became a method of inquiry and social commentary, implementing all words that come to mind. These words arise from questions, feelings, and speculations about the world brought to us by the news. And so incidentally, so as I said, these essays combine personal memories and Forti and Rainer's themes that they explored. This essay is also about my experience performing an Irish jig in the 3rd grade, so that will become clear pretty soon. So I'm going to try to play this audio. It's just a little over 5 minutes, so feel free to kind of try to immerse yourself in it a bit. And if you can't hear it, just drop something in the chat and let me know. It'll play in a couple seconds.
8 becoming 9.
Oops, start over.
I was 8, maybe 9, a birthday. 8 becoming 9. Assuming this was 3rd grade, as I recall. I want to get the details right. Don't want to mislead anyone, i.e. you, the reader. I was part of a quartet of girls performing an Irish jig for the annual school talent show. Was this the only time I voluntarily participated in a choreographed dance? Wholeheartedly, enthusiastically. Let's try to fill in the gaps. I remember practicing a lot, for months before the show, which took place in spring. I wore black isotoner slippers, a green decorative skirt, and I think a white blouse. I'm trying to foreground objects, a challenge this many years out. But the roots, they go down deep. Strawberries send out runners, as if strawberries were sentient, aware that messing with the neighbor's yard is potentially problematic. Isn't it nice that the word neighbor has such a positive connotation, though its origins simply mean dwelling near? Do the strawberries have a sense of where they are heading? My mother would have photos in the basement to resolve all this. I was on stage right, though I doubt I knew the term. I want to be seen in several, not always corresponding, dimensions. This is my only positive memory of performing dance. Though this experience, therefore, disrupts my narrative, I choose to include it. There is no seeing that is not the result of a mode of reading that both reveals and conceals. In Australia, you'll see more stars because you're looking at the center of our galaxy. The edge of the arm and the whirling. It would be this way. Or would it? As I was saying, auditions were required and we made the cut. Not sure when, I'm guessing fall? If I write shortly after the fall of Soviet Europe, there were pockets of different languages here. I must ignore that it doesn't fit the chronology of my story. By my math, 3 more years till that collapse. In producing this collection, in building and playing out the process in which we deliver prompts to each other and respond, simultaneous embrace and dismissal of narrative. Understand what I'm recounting is based on recollections from more than 30 years ago. Retrieving images from the borders of memory. But roots run deep. The other girls, Michelle, Bridget, Sweetie, were Irish, took dance classes for years. I invited them over for a birthday sleepover, February then, ostensibly to practice. But also, I wanted to be friends with 2 of them. It is hard to resist the comfort of categories. I'm with my friend Nora. Is my friend Nora still here? Who decides? We are entering a strange in-between state, when what's nebulous is preferable, or merely what's available. All this time I've understood Irish jig as the name of the specific dance we performed, but now realize, of course, it's simply a catch-all term for the style. Step dance is characterized by a rigid upper body, intricate footwork, high on the balls of the feet. Who makes these determinations? People make borders where they want borders. Once defined, what separates an idea, a perspective, a place or a form from another is still arbitrary. Because venues were small, they danced on tables or the tops of barrels. There are many ways to imitate a flattened experience, where nothing matters equally. Yet that feeling when you're the biggest, that is who you are. Stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, or told to us about or around us, by those who mock or bully us, who love us. Nora left yesterday, we come to find out. This too has roots. A classic Irish name or derived from the Latin honor. Who's to say? But some truths are unequivocal. In a castle, a beautiful crown of a saint, a political figure at the same time. Would this also be the crown of my saint and my king? I don't mean for this piece to be political, but Simone Forti's news animations are. Translating the language of news stories into improvised movements. She might say that's exactly the point. I don't really think she would say that. Now what? Ever notice that Trump looks a lot like Mussolini? Things that go up might one day fall.
That is it for me, and then I'm passing it over to Jhani.
Thanks all. Really amazing. I can't wait to talk afterwards about all of our work. But I will try to start mine now. Let me pull the slideshow up. All right. Okay, can you all see my screen, presenter? Okay, excellent. Awesome. So I'll dive right in. But I want to actually dive in with something I just heard from Valerie's, which is the lines, I want to be seen in several, not always corresponding dimensions, which feels relevant. So entanglement, I and its interstices, weaving, these are material, historical, ethical, spiritual, and futurist themes that I examine in my interdisciplinary work and methodology, and which I like to practice in congress with artists and thinkers across genres and fields. For example, many of the poems that comprise my hybrid collection, Time Regime, emerged directly from cross-disciplinary exchanges with the shifting community of artists, some of whom are also in this room, in different modes of leadership or participation, and some of whom were already or have become new years-long collaborators. I will focus in this presentation on one collaboration in particular, which generated what is now the last poem in my book. This poem, titled Distro, is emblematic of how braiding works within the world of Time Regime, wherein two planes that animate the collection, one a kind of cyborgian dream, and the other engaged in matters of crossing in this material historical plane, metabolize in the final section and are balanced in dissonance within the last poem. So distro happened like this. During the denouement of COVID lockdown from 2020 through 2021, I commissioned 7 artists and writers to produce a collaborative portfolio for Rivulet, the experimental arts journal I co-founded and co-edited until 2023. The formal endpoint that we, the 8 of us, landed upon would take cues from the Oulipo Exquisite Corpse form, but in memoriam of those lives lost due to COVID and its medical comorbidities, or lives lost due to rising racial animus during that period, we opted to refine our method and rename the form an exquisite braid to ensure that, a bit unlike the Oulipo, our ideation and aesthetics were aware of their entanglements as each artist's work was produced in successive response to another's. So for 6 months, we met over Zoom and phone calls, and like several other of the artists in this call, we produced a kind of accumulating diary and conversation in a long shared digital document that included language and images and videos and equations and many, many things that we were all working in different fields. Mess and new practices developed. Visual artists experimented with language, musical composers experimented with abstract photography, and onward. My poem, then titled Over Under, was the first thread to start the braid. Once the portfolio was complete, I revised the poem, and it now appears as Distro. I will read this poem and try to diagram the interweave of our collaboration. And so you will see excerpts of people's work, and you'll also hear it as well. I wish I could show you all, but you can always go to Rivulet and see kind of the full suite. All right. Close your eyes. Wait. Dear thread, before you read this, close your eyes. Swallow. Blue sky of your throat. The body is met by a field, a flip of the sky pop lavender to claret. The body is met by field, marked by the sky, a crater, and water it brings from the west, west, west until you are east. Song is the body, and so defamiliarizes. It waits for sand thread, those excavations, migrant molecular composites. The cow finds salt in the seams, sends warm air into winter air. Go. Wherever you are, rise and go. I take longer here. Dear thread, you pass, pluck up from the back, repeat, calling the water, wait. To borrow, to pass through, and so gives up to unknown futures. I'm around, somewhere in the rain, missing you. Until your cracking bone, against the boulder there was no boulder, this recasts itself as winter, yielding line, hands out in the dark, naming you before I could pull apart the braid, how loneliness is resource, regime, something inflicted and coming in waves, points strung by those with the power to consolidate access. These things needle and liquefy our equatorial seam-sipping bodies with fists. You, luminous shadow, have known. I will write that time is a container for parity, that it is inequitably distributed and policed. But first I'll sleep it, then I will wonder where to go with my hands out. I could go toward closing the gap of time between our bodies, reaching around your shoulder to put a glass in the sink while you rinse lentils 1, 2, 3 times. I do not wait to be touch, to be the husked sound of your hand in the grain. There, I do not wait to be late. Arriving 2 hours after our cousin brother's wedding, ceremony started, walking in, back gate for a weeknight dinner gathering, 2 cities, 2 south, 10 p.m. Dear thread, but we arrived 2 hours early just to sit in the room humid with nearly boiled tea, and not asleep while in a past, the wall and the lamps. Someone wraps the cloth of you around their head. Circle, tuck, close your eyes. In some kind of rain, I could touch you and trail the gaps between your knuckles, the hot hollow of reworked sand, and your mother's sweat 80 years ago on another continent, blood at your back. Dear thread, how do we approach the tension? But I'm still around missing you, beaming you in. Blue sky of your throat. The body is met by, and a flood, not rise. Thank you all so much.
Wow, thank you, Jhani. That was haunting and magical. Beautiful. Um, so now we're going to move into kind of a group discussion about some of the projects we discussed, and I think also just about collaboration in general and how that affects our work. So the first question we have is, how have you employed cross-disciplinary approaches in your collaborative projects? For example, writing combined with different art forms like visual art or music. or crossing into other disciplines like science or the environment? Or how does your work resist genre or cross into different genres? And what role does collaboration play in this dynamic? So I'm actually going to respond to this first. And so I think with my project with Sarah, we very intentionally kind of structured the project and thought about it in a way to incorporate dance and performance techniques into our process. And in particular, we were very interested in exploring chance-based processes because that's such a important aspect of a lot of the work of postmodern dancers and artists, and it's also something that we happen to be interested in as experimental poets. So basically, the way we came up with the topics of the essays was we came up with this fairly elaborate process. We each made a grid, a 10 by 5 grid, corresponding to 5 of our personal memories of dance, and then 10 themes that Rayner and Forti addressed in their work. And then so Sarah made a grid in her living room, I made one on my back patio. Then we came up with like a movement or a gesture that corresponded with one of our memories. We enacted the gesture or the dance movement for 5 minutes, and then wherever our foot landed, that gave us the coordinates that we then sent to the other person. And I won't belabor it too long, but basically we did come up with this chance-based process to come up with the theme. So each of the essays randomly matches a theme and a topic from their work, which created some interesting and kind of unexpected juxtapositions of topics. So anyway, so that was like a really fun way to incorporate, a dance movement and approach into the project. And then I'll just say quickly then in a more specific kind of way, one of my essays it's called Listening Through the Body, and it's about my experience taiko drumming in San Francisco. And for that piece, I structured the essay around, I kind of created like a score of sorts, structured around the rhythm and the structure of this taiko piece that I kind of struggled to learn in San Francisco. And so the essay, the structure is definitely pulling from that musical performance, composition approach. And then it's exploring kind of my insecurities around learning that piece and can I even do this? And then also around some of the ideas that Forti especially explored around communicating with and listening to others as part of a collective or collaborative performance. So those are a couple examples from my work. And who would like to respond next?
I'd love to jump in, and I love hearing about your process, Val. It's so fascinating. And I was just going to read a section of my book where I go to Guelph in Canada because I was invited to this thing called a collaboratory with this artist and scientist called Mother Adand, who wanted to gather artists, environmentalists, poets, everyone sort of working in this realm together. And so I traveled to speak at a conference in Guelph, connecting scientists, poets, and artists engaging with environmental issues. Madhur invites us to this collaboratory, a collaboration plus laboratory. It feels like a sangam, like a confluence of rivers or a gathering of Tamil poets. Catherine wants science rooted in tenderness. Can we reimagine disciplines as zones of care? Amy, who writes physics poems on subatomic and cosmological scales, thanks me for letting her know there are vegan muffins. Veganism feels like the final frontier at these environmental conferences. Forrest wonders when the language of facts and information has been insufficient to move us, whether poetry can resensitize us. Karen speaks of the importance of trialogue, 3 ways of knowing, bringing together peculiar capacities, working with felt, translating Japanese, and managing New York City's water supply. Madhur talks about weddings in a mosaic landscape in India, where there are patches of forest in the grassland. The indigenous group who lives there only have a population of 1,000. They need both forest and grassland to have a marriage. The guests must sit in the grassland while the couple must stand in the shade of the forest. Karen says every poet is used to being the dessert at a science talk. Madhur says there's no dessert here. Everything is a main course. Eat your vegetables. And I was just thinking about this too, because when I've been on book tour, there's one of my conversation partners was bringing up this concept, like in terms of interdisciplinary, but also maybe anti-disciplinary, and trying to figure out like how we shed some of these walls. And I was listening to your presentation, Val, and that line about, people make borders where we want borders, and thinking about that. And I really liked, what one of these participants said about disciplines as zones of cares, and maybe sort of like softening those boundaries around disciplines. So that part I think is interesting. So thank you.
Do Ma or Jhani want to respond, or shall we move to the next question?
Move on.
Okay. Okay, so next is how has working on collaborative projects enabled you to reimagine authorship? How does working with another person or people on something that's typically a more solo endeavor affect your process and your relationship with writing?
So I can take that one. One of the things I've so appreciated about collaboration, there are a number of things, but is that connection to authorship and how it's changed in my own process. So one current example, I think at the end of my slideshow, I showed Literary Cherry. So the way that project developed was we met in March 2 years ago, and we started writing in real time. And we would take turns. So over time, we came up with these rules and constraints. So Adrian and I would take turns coming up with a constraint each time we wrote. We only would meet for an hour, but we have been meeting every Monday for an hour, unless there's some reason we can't meet. And we take turns also choosing the image, which is usually just an image on our phone. And one of the things that we've both noticed over this process is that when we reconvene the following week, we sometimes can't figure out who wrote the last stanza. And it's just like, and then it's been happening more and more. And we both actually kind of love it. I feel that the third voice, the third body that we're creating is, a voice and a writer that would not exist if it weren't for the two of us. I don't think that the writing we've done could happen, obviously, if we were writing solo, which, as we know, so many of us being authors, right, we work alone. So I've been doing collaborative projects for a long time, and I just feel that it's just opened up my process, and it's opened like new possibilities and ideas and visions and techniques. Would anyone else like to add to that?
I can jump in if no one else wants to right now, but I think we were talking about this too, because I'm thinking a lot about not necessarily co-authorship, but like attributions and acknowledgements. And, I wrote this book, which is a memoir, but it has like 30 pages of endnotes and 8 pages of acknowledgements. And I felt like it was really important for me. And I think even within the text itself, I'm always trying to, like, it's not an academic text, and it's very lyrical, but I really wanted to acknowledge where things are coming from, in multiple ways. And so I think a lot about attribution in the page. And then my friend Leslie, who's my thinking partner, who's here too. And, and we have kind of like a daily text thread of just like thoughts. And so much of that has been so generative for our work. And, there's all of these practices that we have that are not solitary, even if the writing is solitary, that inform that work. So.
Cool, thank you. The next question we have is, how can the inclusion of multiple perspectives enhance your work, and what are some ways in which you've infused your collaborative projects with multiple perspectives?
So I think I was going to answer that first, thinking about writing with and about animals and trying to think about how to incorporate their perspectives on the page. And one of the things I write about was this experience working or volunteering with these chimpanzees who had learned American Sign Language. And, and these were kind of tragic experiments that deprived them of their chimpanzeehood. But it was interesting to learn about their vocabulary and give their words agency on the page, and how they formed new words. They used like the process of compounding, and like I felt like they were poets. They called like a swan a water bird. Christmas was sweet tree because the Christmas tree was decorated with candy, and watermelon was candy drink. And then the best was like going to the potty was called dirty good. And but then, trying to sprinkle the text with their words, and like and playing with them, so like the potty was dirty good and colonialism is dirty bad. And then also like the ways they could recognize grief. Like I shared the story of Washo, who had a lot of personal losses, trying to have children, and she recognized that loss in one of her caregivers, who was a graduate student who also had a pregnancy loss. And her response to learning of that grief, I think, is like the most appropriate response to that loss, which I think we as humans often struggle with. If it was just like cry, please, person, hug, and so having that as a refrain too in these other moments of loss in the book, where it was something I was trying to do, and to give space to their perspective.
I just wanted to make a comment kind of related to what you just were talking about, Sangu. And we've talked about this before, but one of the essays, I didn't read it here, but in the book, I focus on some of Simone Forti's work with animals. She was very intrigued by animals, and in particular studied animal movements from animals at the Rome Zoo. This was in the 60s, so I think the zoo enclosures and the situation was pretty dire. But she would study them, make drawings of them, and then imitate their movements. And she made these pieces called alternately zoo mantras or sleepwalkers. And she just felt deep empathy for these animals who were, in their nature, it was in their nature to roam vast distances, but here they had to kind of like pace back and forth to self-soothe and that sort of thing. And I think that's just, similar to you, perhaps. That's like something says a lot about her character, that she incorporated she had this very empathetic stance in general. And I think that really came through in a lot of her work. And then I just wanted to say just briefly, in terms of perspectives and how I think about it in some of my, this project in particular. I think that Sarah and I had really different, my collaborator, Sarah, we had very different backgrounds. I had like zero background in dance, like pretty much zero aptitude in dance. And she has like a much more extensive experience with dance and a much more positive relationship to dance. And I thought, so this topic is not something I would have ever gravitated to on my own, but I thought that the contrast in our experiences and our perspectives was like kind of created this like interesting tension that made me like more excited about, this kind of topic. And then another quick note about perspectives. So we sent the manuscript to Yvonne Rainer and Simone Forti, and Yvonne actually read the manuscript and sent us like somewhat detailed, spirited comments, sometimes very critical about the writing. And then she was so generous, and she was like, please feel free to use these however you want. I trust you to do something interesting with this. So we incorporated her comments in the book. We also tried to address her criticisms and improve the essays and make them more accurate. But I just thought that was a cool way to like include another perspective. And I think that's something that is important to me as a writer and an artist, is to like let yourself be vulnerable and take risks of like we're basically laying our mistakes bare in the book, and I hope that that's like compelling to a reader. So it's something I think about too. But yeah, through this collaboration, that kind of became more present and yeah, like a more I don't know, it's an area of focus in the book that I didn't really expect, and it was kind of scary, but I think I'm glad we did it that way. Maybe we'll move on to the one more question. Does that sound good? Okay, so kind of in closing for the questions, what have you discovered are some best practices when working with a collaborator or multiple collaborators? What kinds of challenges arose during your collaborations, and how did you address them? Or were there things you might do differently if you were to do it over again?
Could take this one first. It feels really related to a note in the chat also, right above it about where does ego sit in the work, and how do you kind of navigate obstacles? That's not quite exactly what I will talk about, Leslie, but I'm really interested in that question. Because it's definitely something I struggle with, even though I love collaborating. And I think there's that. I actually think I like to go into collaborations because I want to practice vulnerability, and I want to practice healthy boundaries, and I want to practice um, softening. And I think I have a really strong, I'm thinking poetically a little bit, but thinking about what Sangu was talking about the at the co-laboratory, and thinking about discipline and disciplines as care. I think as artists, maybe we all have rules that we kind of set for ourselves. And there's something really interesting about what that means to be in self-discipline around some of that, and how do we break it? And I don't think that in collaborations that I've been a part of, um, there is ever an equation or like a rule that we come up with break out of kind of atomized practice, but there is that third being that emerges, Ma, if there are two of us, like you were saying. So kind of one example, or I was kind of thinking about all the collaborations and I was that I've been a part of, and one of them is actually, it's an interesting one because it is the kind of platform for the portfolio Exquisite Braid, and Rivulet itself was a collaboration. And it evolved over time. It was a different journal for a while, and I worked on it with my co-editor. And so we have uh, kind of different ideas about our ambitions with this project, and um, different ideas about its form, and different ideas about who we would invite and who we would commission. And I do think that um, there's something really interesting that I've learned, um, especially when working with another individual, wherein you might invite even more people into that process, is to be in a space of outlining your desires first, and maybe finding like mapping desires, um, and then defining goals, but then defining your terms a little bit. That's kind of something that I was thinking about with at least the creation of a journal in which you are an editor, is really kind of thinking about what revision is going to look like when you are collaborating with other people too. Um, and yeah, I think I just want to start like leave that open there. I think I um, tried to weave in other things that we all talked about. I'm not sure if I fully answered it, but I'm happy to pass it.
Add a few words. Thank you, Jhani. Well, I mean, this sounds pretty common sense, but I have found that my collaborations go better if there is regular communication. Like, just like I said, for example, with Adrian, we meet every Monday. Because I find that even if say you're only in communication via email, once a month or something like that, I just feel like the projects, it could go more smoothly if you have regular communication. And also, one thing I try to remember is that collaborators can also be leaders or followers. So sometimes it's not necessarily that we're all equal in a project, but we might be flexible and take turns at one point. Okay, I'm going to take the lead. Someone's going through a hard time, and then, oh, this person, wants to, take the lead now. So I think being flexible and everyone understanding that flexible relationship is something that I try to remember. And yeah, and another thing I think about is, when I collaborate with people, especially when they're large scale collaborations, is really taking into account all our lived experiences, because they're gonna obviously like inform how we are all like interacting with each other, and just having conversations about that, and how we, envision the process of collaboration working. And so I found that to be really helpful. Hopefully that answered a little helpful for you, Leslie, for your question. Thanks.
I'll jump in since I was listening and watching attentively. I was curious what your thoughts were collectively about how collaboration works when you think about it in terms of audience. And for me, when I think about collaborating, like for example, I think of children's books, that you have uh, writers and illustrators, and then you often imagine story time where you have a whole group of kids together listening and making sense of the story together. How does it work when you think about the audience and how we divide up age groups and gender? There's all that sort of stuff. Is that productive? Is that not productive? Is that to the side of the conversation? I'll mute.
I could jump in talking about the epistolary, because I use the sort of letter form in my book. The first two are sort of written to my father and grandfather, and the third is to the reader, but really it's all to the reader. So I think I was thinking a lot about my reader as my Kalyana Mitra, as like, we're going to go through this big journey. There's a lot of sorrow, in this journey, and how to hold it, how to carry it so it's not too oppressive, but it is, powerful. So I was thinking about that collaboration with the reader on the page, and also bringing in moments of pause and moments of levity, and like spacing, to kind of, I thought a lot about flow in the book, with the reader in mind. So anyone else wants to talk about collaboration with the audience?
Well, I can jump in. So that's such a great question. I mean, I think in terms of, because I do different kinds of collaborations, like who is the audience going to be, right? So when I collaborate with experimental musicians, usually the folks who go to experimental music performances are experimental musicians themselves. So, and just having that knowledge, it's like, oh, okay. Um, I and my collaborators were not like, oh my gosh, we have to make this like accessible for like, a general audience. I don't know if that makes sense. So so I definitely think about audiences, and I think my collaborators, we would all say yes. So I would say like knowing who your audience is, because I've also done stuff for that, like the public, like, are open to the public, and so I do keep that in mind. And also when we're planning beforehand, like, oh, how would this collaboration work with like a general audience? So yeah, those are my 2 cents.
Yeah, feel like I have a similar perspective as you, Ma, because I think most of my writing and work, it's pretty experimental, and so the audience is other experimental poets and artists. I do when the first book that Sarah and I wrote, it's a kind of a compilation of collaboratively written like sonnets, like free verse sonnets, and then letters to each other explaining the process of writing the sonnets and also just kind of talking about our everyday lives. And I have noticed that that book, like my mom really likes that book. Like people who are not like immersed in this like experimental world that I'm usually in, tend to like that book. And so I think that's kind of cool. That's like, okay, I reached someone else with this project that's like a little more straightforward in a way than what I normally do. And I just thought I don't have a ton to say, but with regard to Leslie's question about ego, and you kind of put this in the question, but I'm just thinking of all the people that I've worked with, and I think that I haven't had maybe as many collaborations as some of you have, but I don't think that I don't think I've really encountered much ego in my collaborative work, and I think it is because people kind of self-select, and if and if you really are interested in collaboration, you probably aren't going to be someone who's like, I really want this to be all about me or something. So you're very open to other ideas and inputs, and working together, and yeah, not having like a preconceived notion of what you want to do. So I think, yeah, I think it kind of people kind of self-select out of it. I mean, I'm sure it happens, but um, so I've had like really positive experiences, and I think all of us on this call, we have enjoyed like working together on this presentation because we all really love collaborating. So, and maybe that comes through in our presentation too. Are there any other? I mean, I think we have a few more minutes. We could move into the Cento and soon, which is our little interactive activity. Unless there's any other questions from the audience. All right, so I'm going to share. Ma, you would like me to share the screen, right? Right. Okay.
Okay, so we're going to end today's panel with a closing experiment, a collaborative cento. And as Val mentioned at the beginning, the cento is a pastiche poem made up of lines from the work of an author or of other authors, Louis Turco, in which citation is given and offered. So what we're going to do now, we chose 2 lines each, and we are going to put them in the chat. And if anyone, hopefully all of you in the audience, would like to drop a line from our presentation, or even a phrase or a word that resonated for you in the chat, that would be wonderful. And then we will read the lines, our lines that we wrote, and then we'll read the lines from the audience. Okay, find it. Okay, I think we're done, right? Did everyone write their 2 lines? Okay, we are going to read our collaborative cento. Jhani, I think you're reading the. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I thought that too. What harms one body harms all bodies.
But first I'll sleep it, then I will wonder where to.
But the roots, they go down deep.
All right, what harms one body harms all bodies.
Forest guardians, oxhair robes, pewter magpies.
There are many ways to perform a flattened existence. A beautiful crown of a saint.
Ceremony started walking in, that gate for a.
Like tributaries to the same river, our stories are entwined.
Retrieving images from the borders of memory.
I dab viridian green on eyelids.
Thought locks.
Fun.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us.
This was so fun. I love our collective poem.
I love Gotta save it.
Excellent panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very
Thank
inspiring.
you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
I loved it too. It was really good.
Yeah.
Leslie.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I'm excited to think about children's books. Also, thinking
Children's
about that.
books.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating zone of right. It's one of the first beachheads of collaboration, I think.
Yeah, I definitely did some research and reached out to some children's book authors for this panel, but it didn't come together. But we have a great panel, so it worked out. But yeah, that's definitely very obvious collaboration. And I work on children's books occasionally I work as a book editor. Um, and how we've been doing it is we just have an author, the author writes the text, and then they've hired an illustrator to illustrate. So it's not, I mean, that's collaborative in a way, but it's not like they are in tandem working together, generating a project. And I don't know how that normally, I'm sure everyone's process is different when you're writing a children's book, if it's sometimes more truly collaborative where they're exchanging ideas and generating the story together and things like that, or if it's more the writer writes the text and then the illustrator draws it, you know?
Mhm.
But very
Yeah.
cool.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a good one.
One.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.